Okay, next what we're going to work on is actually going in reverse order. We're going to start out with the roots, which means we're going to start out with the answers, and we're going to go back and figure out what the polynomial is. And you did this earlier in chapter 4. You just didn't have to do it with imaginary numbers before. One thing that I need you to keep in mind is that when you're going from the root to the factor, you're going from the root to the factor, because that's going to be one of the steps we're going to do. You have to write it in the form of x minus a, okay? These are the a's that we're talking about. Okay, so start with your 4. So if I were to plug the 4 into this x minus a, that means I'm going to have x minus 4. Okay, now substitute in the negative 3i. So if I did x minus a negative 3i, of course that being minus a negative, that's going to change to a plus. Now, based on what we just talked about, then if I have a negative 3i, I'm guaranteed that positive 3i is also one of those roots, because remember, they have to be in pairs. So even though it's not listed here, I know that I have to include it down here. So put 3i into this, and that's going to give me x minus 3i. Okay, so now what we're going to do is multiply this out. Okay, now since these two are imaginary, I definitely suggest that you start by multiplying those two together first. So I'm going to bring down the x minus 4. Now this is just your FOIL method, so we're going to go with x times x. Now x times negative 3i is just negative 3ix. 3i times x, so that would be plus 3ix. And 3i times a negative 3i is going to be a negative 9i squared. You just do the 3 times the negative 3, which is negative 9. I times I is I squared. Okay, what's going to happen first is you go to combine these two terms in the middle because they're like terms. They're going to add out. And you're doing things correctly. Those two are supposed to add out, because your final answer is not going to have any i's in it. You've got to get rid of those. So that takes care of those. Now, I squared. If you remember, when we did imaginaries before, I squared is equal to negative 1. Okay, so that means that I can replace I squared with a negative 1. Okay, so I'm going to bring down the x squared. So here's what's going to happen with this. This is now a negative 1. So I've got a negative 9 times a negative 1, which is going to give me a positive 9. Okay. Now, last, multiply these two out again, which is just the FOIL method. So if you FOIL this out, here's your answer. Okay, let's look at one more. Actually, the second one's going to be a little bit easier than this first one, because the root that's given to you this time is only just the 6i, okay? But if you're given one that's imaginary, or you're given one that's irrational, you remember they've got to be in pairs. So what you've got to remember is you've got to include negative 6i. Even though it's not listed there, you've got to do that. Now you're going to write everything using x minus a. So I would have x minus 6i. And then I would have x minus a negative, so that's going to change to plus. Okay, so now let's FOIL these two out. So x times x is x squared. X times 6i, so that would be plus I, 6ix. Negative 6i times x. Now, negative 6i times a positive 6i is negative 36i squared. And multiply the numbers, which is the negative 36. The I times the I is the I squared. Okay, so let's simplify this. These two are going to add out. That's going to end up giving you 0. And then we replace the I squared with negative 1. So we've got our x squared. So negative 36 times a negative 1 is a positive 36. There's my answer.